On that Christmas night, no door was forced open, no stranger ever stepped inside the house, and yet everyone at the table died. What happened inside the Ashford family mansion was not an ordinary crime. It was the silent result of bad choices, ambition, secrets, and decisions that seemed harmless until it was far too late. Stay until the end, because understanding how this dinner ended with no survivors will completely change the way you see family, power, and trust. Where are you listening to this story from? Are you alone in your room, or perhaps gathered with loved ones? Either way, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because stories like the tragedy of the Ashford family deserve to be remembered, shared, and never forgotten. On Christmas Eve, while most homes filled with laughter, soft music, and promises of reconciliation, an isolated estate in rural United States was preparing for a very different kind of dinner. The Ashford family, wealthy, influential, and shaped by decades of silent conflict, gathered around a luxurious table with the declared intention of ending old disputes and protecting a legacy built on power and control. But behind the polite toasts and carefully filtered conversations lay hidden debts, broken alliances, and resentments that had never truly been buried. Every chair at that table carried a history of ambition, guilt, or fear, and every decision made throughout the night pushed the family step by step toward a point of no return. This is not a story about monsters or invisible forces. It is a story about real people, human error, and the dangerous illusion that everything can be controlled. The last Christmas of the Ashford family reconstructs in unsettling detail how a single dinner was enough to destroy an entire family, and why no one walked away alive to tell their version of the truth. Marcus Ashford had learned over the course of his life that silence was rarely empty. It carried weight, intention, and sometimes warning. As his car advanced along the narrow private road leading to the Ashford estate, that silence pressed against him from all sides, thickened by falling snow and the absence of any other signs of life. Christmas Eve had always been complicated in his family, but this year felt different, not louder, not angrier, just heavier. The snow fell steadily, swallowing sound and blurring the outlines of the forest. The headlights illuminated frozen branches arching over the road like a tunnel, each curve reinforcing the feeling that he was being guided somewhere he no longer controlled. Marcus turned the radio off miles earlier. Music felt dishonest tonight. He had tried to refuse the invitation. Eleanor Ashford did not accept refusals. The message had been brief, formal, and impossible to ignore. Christmas Eve, 7 o'clock. Everyone will be present. No explanation. No room for negotiation. Marcus had read it 3 times before closing his phone, already aware that absence would be interpreted as defiance. And defiance, in the Ashford family, always came at a cost. The iron gates appeared suddenly through the snowfall. Marcus slowed, entered the security code, and waited as the heavy metal bars parted. As he drove through, a familiar sensation tightened in his chest. The subtle shift of power that came with crossing onto property his mother had ruled for decades. The house emerged gradually, massive and austere. Built to project permanence, it stood untouched by trends or warmth. Stone walls, tall windows, sharp angles softened only by the snow clinging to ledges and railings. To outsiders it was impressive. To Marcus, it had always felt like a place designed to keep people distant, even family. He parked near the entrance and remained inside the car longer than necessary. His hands rested on the steering wheel, knuckles pale. He breathed slowly, counting each inhale and exhale. This was a habit developed over years of crisis management. Numbers, spreadsheets, and projections had taught him that control was possible, as long as variables were acknowledged. Family had never followed rules. When he stepped inside, warmth enveloped him instantly. Fireplaces burned low and controlled, casting steady light across polished floors and expensive furniture. The air carried layers of scent, pine, wood polish and food, prepared with excessive confidence. Eleanor believed abundance reassured people. Marcus had learned that it often did the opposite. She stood near the living room window, posture straight, hands folded lightly in front of her. Eleanor Ashford had aged without ever truly softening. At 72, her silver hair was immaculate, her expression calm and unreadable. She did not rush toward Marcus or open her arms. She turned her head slightly, acknowledging his presence. "Marcus," she said, "not a greeting, a confirmation. You're late." "You said 7, he replied evenly, glancing at his watch. "It's 6:58. A pause followed, brief, calculated. Eleanor smiled, thin and precise. "Details," she said. That smile had once been comforting. Now it felt procedural. Marcus removed his coat and scanned the room. Relatives and associates filled the space in careful clusters. Cousins he had not spoken to since depositions had forced them into the same room. Spouses who smiled politely but avoided prolonged eye contact. Former business partners who now chose their words with legal caution. Everyone was dressed impeccably. No one looked relaxed. And then he saw Daniel. His younger brother stood near the entrance to the dining room, already holding a glass of wine. Daniel laughed easily, his posture loose, shoulders relaxed, as if the past decade had been a misunderstanding rather than a sequence of near disasters. He looked healthy, confident, untouched. Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest. 10 years earlier, Daniel's aggressive expansion strategies had nearly collapsed the Ashford firm. Risky investments, hidden debts, projections inflated beyond reason. Marcus had spent years repairing the damage quietly, absorbing blame, while Daniel vanished when consequences arrived. Forgiveness had followed. Not because it was deserved, but because Eleanor had decided the family could not survive public fracture. The cost of that forgiveness had never been shared equally. "Marcus," Daniel said, noticing him at last. He raised his glass slightly. "You made it." "I didn't have a choice," Marcus replied. Daniel laughed, as if it were a joke. Dinner was announced shortly after. Eleanor's voice carried through the room, with the same authority that had once commanded boardrooms. People moved toward the dining room instinctively, taking seats assigned with deliberate care. The table was long, polished to a mirror-like shine. Crystal glasses caught the chandelier's light, scattering it across white linen and silverware, aligned with obsessive precision. Marcus took his seat directly across from Daniel. Eleanor remained standing. "To family," she said, lifting her glass. "To continuity." Marcus noticed what she did not say. Forgiveness, love, peace. Glasses touched, wine was poured. The illusion of reunion had begun. As the first course was served, Marcus felt the familiar tightening settle deeper in his chest. The staff moved with rehearsed precision, placing plates without a word, retreating as quickly as they had appeared. Eleanor watched them go, eyes following until the dining room doors closed softly behind them. Privacy at last. Conversation started cautiously, compliments about the food, remarks about the weather. Someone mentioned how beautiful the property looked under fresh snow. Marcus participated just enough to appear present, answering when spoken to, smiling when required. Inside, his attention remained fixed on patterns, who leaned toward whom, whose glass emptied fastest, whose smile faded quickest. Daniel spoke often, too often. He filled silence with confidence, recounting stories of projects that never quite became specific, partnerships that sounded promising but vague. Marcus noticed how often Daniel avoided details, how smoothly he redirected questions that might have required numbers. "Things are different now," Daniel said at one point, meeting Marcus's eyes deliberately. "We've all learned from the past." Marcus set his fork down. "Some of us did," he replied. The table went momentarily quiet. before a cousin laughed nervously and changed the subject. Eleanor said nothing, but Marcus felt her attention sharpen. Wine flowed freely. Marcus limited himself to a single glass, nursing it slowly. He had learned long ago that clarity was a form of defense in this family. Daniel refilled his own glass without hesitation, encouraging others to do the same. Laughter grew louder. Edges softened. By the time the main course arrived, the mood had shifted. Not lighter, looser. Words slipped out more easily. Old grievances surfaced in half-jokes. Someone mentioned the lawsuit without naming it. Someone else spoke about money with the casual confidence of someone who had never truly lacked it. Marcus felt the weight of years pressing in. He remembered nights spent alone in offices, lit only by monitors, recalculating losses, finding ways to keep the company solvent, while Eleanor shielded Daniel from consequences. He remembered convincing banks to wait, partners to stay, employees to trust. No one at this table knew the full cost of that stability. Halfway through the meal, Eleanor pushed her chair back. "Excuse me," she said calmly. She left the room. The shift was immediate. Daniel leaned back, exhaling as if released from restraint. "Well," he said lightly, "that didn't take long." "For what?" Marcus asked. "For the tension," Daniel replied. "You could cut it with a knife." Marcus studied his brother. "You seem comfortable." "I am," Daniel said, smiling. "I think tonight is about moving forward." Marcus did not respond. He had learned that silence often revealed more than argument. When Eleanor returned, she looked composed, almost serene. She resumed her seat, folded her napkin carefully, and surveyed the table. "Dessert will be served shortly," she said. "After that, we will discuss the future of the Ashford assets." The words settled heavily over the table. Marcus felt certainty replace unease. This dinner was not about healing old wounds. It was about deciding who would be allowed to survive what came next. Dessert arrived with quiet ceremony. Porcelain plates, delicate portions, careful placement. Marcus noticed how Eleanor waited until every guest had been served before lifting her spoon. Control, as always, expressed through patience. The room felt warmer now, heavy with food and wine and unspoken expectation. Outside, the snow continued to fall, thick and relentless, sealing the estate off from the rest of the world. Marcus glanced once at the tall windows, at the darkness pressing in from beyond the glass. No one was leaving any time soon. Eleanor cleared her throat. "As I said earlier," she began, voice even, "this evening is about the future of the Ashford family. Not sentiment, not tradition, survival." Several guests shifted in their seats. Forks paused mid-air. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Eleanor never used words lightly. She continued, "Our financial position is vulnerable, more than most of you realize." Daniel laughed softly. "That sounds dramatic." Eleanor turned to him slowly. "It is factual." The laughter died. Marcus watched faces change, confusion giving way to concern. Cousins exchanged looks. An uncle frowned. Someone asked quietly what she meant. Eleanor folded her hands. Certain decisions were made over the past decade. Investments, guarantees, risks taken under the assumption that markets would behave predictably. Her eyes flicked to Daniel for half a second. They did not. Marcus finally spoke. "How exposed are we?" Eleanor met his gaze. "Enough that if corrective action is not taken immediately, everything collapses within months." Silence followed. Daniel leaned forward. "You're exaggerating. We've weathered worse." "No," Marcus said, "we haven't." Daniel turned to him sharply. "You don't know that." Marcus held his ground. "I do. I've been cleaning up after you for years." The words landed harder than Marcus intended. A collective breath was drawn around the table. Daniel's smile tightened. "Careful." Eleanor raised a hand. Enough. She reached for a folder beside her chair, thick, neatly labeled. Marcus recognized it immediately. Documentation, evidence. "These are our options," Eleanor said. "None of them are pleasant." She slid copies across the table. As Marcus read, his stomach sank. Liquidation clauses, personal liability, agreements that transferred risk not to the company but to individuals. Daniel's face paled. "You signed these," Marcus said quietly. "They were standard," Daniel snapped. "They were reckless." Voices rose, accusations surfaced. Someone stood up, demanding explanations. Another guest accused Eleanor of hiding information. Eleanor remained seated, unmoved. "I hid nothing. You chose not to look." Marcus understood then. This dinner was not just disclosure. It was a narrowing of exits. Eleanor spoke again. "There is one path that preserves the Ashford name." Every eye turned to her. "It requires sacrifice," she said, "from some more than others." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. Outside, the snow thickened. Inside, the walls seemed to close in. The dinner had crossed a line. There would be no return to polite silence now. The arguments fractured into smaller, sharper exchanges. Cousins demanded to know whose signatures bound them personally. An uncle accused Eleanor of engineering the crisis. A distant relative quietly stood and poured himself another drink without asking. Marcus stayed seated, eyes scanning the table. Panic revealed character faster than any celebration ever could. Daniel pushed his chair back abruptly. "This is manipulation," he said. "You brought us here to corner us." Eleanor did not deny it. "I brought you here to prevent chaos. If this conversation happened in boardrooms or courtrooms, the damage would be irreversible." "And what about trust?" Daniel shot back. Eleanor's expression hardened. "Trust is a luxury we exhausted years ago." Marcus finally stood. The movement alone drew attention. "Everyone needs to stop," he said. His voice was calm but firm enough to cut through the noise. "Yelling won't change the numbers. These agreements exist whether we like them or not." Daniel turned toward him. "So what? You're on her side now?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "I'm on the side of reality." He tapped the folder. "Some of us are more exposed than others. That isn't opinion. It's documented." A hush followed. One cousin asked quietly, "What happens if we don't agree?" Eleanor answered. "Then creditors step in. Assets are frozen. Personal guarantees are enforced. Lawsuits follow. The Ashford name becomes a public case study in collapse." The word collapse lingered. Marcus noticed how Daniel avoided eye contact now, how his confidence had drained away, replaced by calculation. Daniel spoke again, slower. "And this one path you mentioned?" Eleanor folded her hands once more. "It involves restructuring responsibility, transferring liability, consolidating exposure." "To whom?" someone asked. Eleanor did not answer immediately. Marcus felt it before she spoke. A tightening certainty. "To those whose decisions created the greatest risk," Eleanor said. All eyes moved to Daniel. His face flushed. "You can't be serious." Marcus felt a flicker of something, not satisfaction, not relief, just inevitability. "This isn't justice," Daniel said. "It's scapegoating." "It's consequence," Marcus replied. Daniel laughed, sharp and humorless. "Easy for you to say. You're insulated." Marcus shook his head. "No one at this table is insulated anymore." Outside, wind rattled the windows. Snow piled higher against the glass. Eleanor leaned forward. "The decision must be unanimous," she said. "If we proceed, it protects the majority. If we don't, everyone falls." Marcus understood then the final cruelty of the choice. It wasn't about saving the family. It was about deciding who would be allowed to be ruined first. No one rushed to speak. The weight of Eleanor's words pressed down on the table like a physical force. Marcus felt it in his shoulders, in the way everyone seemed to sit a little straighter, as if posture alone could protect them. Eleanor broke the silence. "This cannot linger," she said. "Indecision will destroy us faster than any creditor." Aunt Margaret shook her head slowly. "You're asking us to condemn someone." "I'm asking you to acknowledge reality," Eleanor replied. Marcus watched Daniel closely. His brother's hands trembled just enough to be noticeable as he reached for his glass. He did not drink. "What exactly does this mean?" a cousin asked. "Legally, practically." Eleanor answered without hesitation. "It means certain individuals assume full responsibility for the liabilities tied to their decisions. Others are released. The company survives. The name survives." "And the people?" Margaret asked. Eleanor's eyes hardened. "People endure." Marcus spoke carefully. "Endure isn't the same as survive." Eleanor met his gaze. "It's the only option left." The folder was passed again, this time with pens. Marcus felt something twist inside him. Contracts were familiar territory. But this, asking blood to sign away futures, felt different. Daniel stood abruptly. "This is insane. You can't expect—" "Sit down," Eleanor said. The command carried a lifetime of authority. Daniel hesitated, then obeyed. Marcus remembered their childhood. Daniel protected, excused, shielded from consequences. That pattern had not disappeared. It had metastasized. One by one, voices rose. "If we don't do this, everything collapses." "This is extortion." "You made those decisions, Daniel." "I trusted the advisors." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Trust had been weaponized in this family. Eleanor addressed the table. "A vote," she said. "Now." She looked to Marcus first. He felt the room's expectation tighten around him. Whatever he chose would validate the outcome. Marcus spoke quietly. "I won't lead this, but I won't pretend there's an alternative." That was enough. Hands began to lift, slowly, reluctantly. Marcus counted. The majority formed with sickening ease. Daniel stared at the raised hands as if they belonged to strangers. "You're all cowards," he said hoarsely. Marcus felt the word land, not as accusation, but as truth. Eleanor nodded once. "Then it's decided." Daniel laughed, a hollow sound. "So that's it? Christmas dinner and an execution?" "Stop," Marcus said. Daniel turned to him, eyes bright with anger and something close to panic. "You let this happen?" Marcus did not deny it. Dessert plates sat untouched now. Coffee cooled. The house creaked softly around them. Eleanor gathered the signed papers. "You may all stay the night," she said. "Travel isn't safe in this weather." No one argued. As chairs scraped back and people drifted toward the hallways, Marcus lingered. Daniel remained seated, staring at the table. "You didn't have to," Daniel said without looking up. Marcus answered truthfully, "Yes, I did." Outside, the storm intensified, and with the vote cast, the Ashfords crossed the final line between mistake and catastrophe. Sleep did not come easily to anyone that night. Marcus lay awake in the guest room he had occupied since his father's death, staring at the ceiling as the wind battered the walls of the house. Every sound felt amplified, footsteps in distant corridors, the groan of settling wood, the low hum of the heating system struggling against the cold. He replayed the vote again and again, the raised hands, the avoidance of eye contact, the relief that had followed, brief, shameful, undeniable. Near dawn, a sharp noise cut through the house. Not a scream, not a crash, a door. Marcus sat up, heart racing. He listened. Silence returned, thick and uneasy. He dressed quickly and stepped into the hallway. Dim lights glowed along the corridor, casting long shadows. A figure moved at the far end, Eleanor, wrapped in a robe, walking with purpose. "Did you hear that?" Marcus asked quietly. Eleanor nodded once. "Yes." They walked together toward Daniel's room. The door stood ajar. Inside, the room was empty, the bed untouched, the bathroom dark. A cold draft seeped in through an open window. Marcus felt dread bloom in his chest. "He wouldn't," he said. Eleanor stepped inside, scanning the room. On the desk lay Daniel's phone, his wallet, his keys. "He would," Eleanor replied, and he did. They found him an hour later, not far from the house, near the edge of the property, where the trees grew thick and the snow lay undisturbed. Daniel was alive, barely. Exposure had done its work. His skin pale, lips blue, breath shallow and uneven. Someone shouted for help. Another vomited into the snow. Marcus knelt beside his brother, panic breaking through his restraint. "Daniel," he said, shaking him gently. "Stay awake." Daniel's eyes fluttered open. He tried to speak, failed. They carried him back inside. Eleanor called emergency services. The signal crackled. Roads were impassable. Help would not arrive soon. The house fell into chaos. Blankets, hot water, arguments about blame and responsibility. Marcus stayed with Daniel, watching his chest rise and fall, counting each breath like a fragile promise. This was not part of the plan, or perhaps it was. As dawn crept through the windows, Marcus understood the truth. The vote had not ended the danger. It had unleashed it. Mourning did not bring relief. It brought reckoning. Daniel survived the night, but only just. The family doctor reached through a failing connection was blunt. Severe hypothermia, internal stress, risk of organ failure. He needed a hospital. None could be reached. The house shifted into crisis mode. Phones were checked obsessively, roads monitored through security cameras, now blinded by snow. The staff, instructed to remain, moved with visible fear. The illusion of authority Eleanor carried had begun to crack. Marcus stayed near Daniel, who drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time his eyes opened, they searched the room as if looking for an explanation that still refused to exist. "You voted," Daniel whispered at one point. Marcus swallowed. "Yes." Daniel closed his eyes again. The word hung between them like a wound. Arguments erupted elsewhere in the house. "This is on you!" a cousin shouted at Eleanor. "All of it!" Eleanor did not deny responsibility. "What's done is done," she said. "Now we contain the damage." Containment became the obsession. Discussions turned to legal exposure, to statements, to narratives. Marcus watched with growing horror as survival instinct replaced humanity. By afternoon, mistakes compounded. Someone suggested sedating Daniel to keep him calm. Another argued it was dangerous. Eleanor approved a measured dose, trusting outdated medical guidance. The sedative slowed Daniel's breathing. Panic followed. They attempted to reverse it. Failed. Daniel died quietly, without ceremony, while snow continued to fall outside the windows. Silence overtook the house. Marcus felt something in him break. There was no scream, no collapse, just the unbearable weight of finality. And then, the next error. Eleanor ordered the body moved. "We can't explain this yet," she said. "We need time." Marcus stared at her. "You're making it worse." "I'm preventing chaos," she replied. But chaos had already begun. The stress, the guilt, the cold, they fed into each other. A guest collapsed later that evening, heart failure. The doctor's voice over the phone was helpless. Another followed, slipping on the stairs in panic, breaking his neck. One death became two. Two became more. Every attempt to control the situation accelerated its collapse. By nightfall, the Ashford mansion was no longer a home. It was a closed system failing under pressure. Marcus stood alone in the dining room, staring at the long table where it had begun. The silverware still gleamed. The damage was already irreversible. By the final night, the Ashford estate no longer felt isolated by snow alone. It was sealed by fear. Emergency lights hummed softly in the hallways after a partial power failure. The generator struggled, forcing sections of the house into darkness. Rooms were abandoned, doors left open. The staff retreated to one wing, whispering prayers Marcus pretended not to hear. 3 bodies lay covered inside the house. Daniel's death had broken something fundamental. The others followed not as shock, but as consequence. Exhaustion, panic, poor judgment layered upon guilt too heavy to carry. Marcus moved through the mansion like a ghost, his suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He had stopped checking his phone hours earlier. There was no signal, no rescue, no audience beyond those trapped inside. Eleanor sat alone in the study, surrounded by documents that no longer mattered. Her posture remained straight, but her hands trembled slightly as she poured herself a drink she barely touched. "This was never supposed to happen," she said when Marcus entered. Marcus did not answer. "What would you have done differently?" she asked, not turning to face him. He considered the question carefully. "I would have stopped pretending control was the same as responsibility." Eleanor closed her eyes. As the night deepened, the final unraveling came quietly. A fire started in the east wing, an electrical fault worsened by stress on the system. Smoke spread before alarms could be properly triggered. Panic surged again, sharp and immediate. People ran where they should have waited. Doors were opened that should have remained closed. Someone fell. Someone else inhaled too much smoke. Marcus tried to guide them. He failed. By the time flames were visible through the windows, the house was already lost. Eleanor refused to leave. "This house ends with us," she said simply. Marcus understood then that survival had never truly been Eleanor's goal. He stayed. As smoke filled the room, Marcus felt clarity, brutal and complete. The Ashford legacy had not been destroyed by fire or weather or fate. It had been dismantled decision by decision. When authorities finally reached the estate the next morning, there were no survivors, only ashes, contracts, and a table set for a dinner that would never end. The last Christmas of the Ashford family passed into silence, not as a mystery, but as a warning.